For thousands of years, the ports along India's western coast received massive ships loaded with spices and textiles. But navigating alongside those trade galleons were smaller, battered vessels. They carried exhausted people running for their lives. When prejudice and violence drove entire communities out of their homelands, they repeatedly sailed toward the Indian subcontinent. Why, across thousands of years of human history, did so many persecuted groups find a safe home here? Ancient India was not a perfect utopia. Social divisions and prejudices existed. Yet, when faced with vulnerable outsiders seeking refuge, the broader society leaned toward inclusion rather than exclusion. Throughout history, while many other nations restricted entry to the desperate, Indian rulers and communities provided the land and protection needed to start over. The ancient tradition of Vasudeva Kutumbakam set the stage for this acceptance. It translates to "the world is one family," a worldview that treats a global network of strangers with the same care and responsibility as one's own kin. This concept worked in tandem with dharma, a sense of moral duty. For ancient kings and everyday citizens alike, protecting the defenseless was viewed as a strict ethical obligation. These principles dictated local policies for millennia, creating a specific social framework that protected millions of lives. When Jewish refugees reached the Malabar coast, local Chera rulers issued royal charters on copper plates. These documents granted the community permanent land and the legal right to trade, allowing them to establish the settlement now known as Jewtown. Centuries later, Zoroastrians fleeing the Arab conquest of Persia arrived in Gujarat. According to tradition, the local ruler showed them a cup of milk filled to the brim, implying his kingdom had no room. A Parsi priest responded by gently dissolving a spoonful of sugar into the milk. They promised to sweeten the society without disrupting it. They kept that promise. Parsi families like the Tatas and Godrej drove India's modern industrialization, while pioneers like Homi Bhabha laid the foundations for the nation's nuclear and scientific programs. By establishing schools, hospitals, and orphanages, Syrian Christian communities anchored Kerala's development in education and social welfare, contributing to the region's high levels of social progress today. In each case, assimilation in India did not mean erasure. These groups retained their distinct religious identities while actively building up their host nation. Not every community arrived fleeing terror. Arab merchants sailed to the west coast seeking the lucrative spice trade. Welcomed for their commercial skills, they integrated peacefully, blending Islamic practices with local customs. Conversely, the city community arrived in chains. Originating from East Africa, they were brought to India between the 13th and 18th centuries as soldiers, sailors, and slaves. Yet, in a society that valued military and administrative merit over geographic origin, the cities rose to prominence. Figures like Malik Ambar became highly successful generals and de facto rulers of powerful sultanates, commanding massive island fortresses. The open coast functioned as a gateway to a society where diverse groups could navigate the social structure and rise to positions of vital importance. Moving into the 19th and 20th centuries, the Baha'i faith faced severe religious persecution in Iran. Many migrated to India, where the religion's core message of unity resonated deeply with local philosophical traditions. In 1959, following a popular uprising against military occupation, the 14th Dalai Lama fled across the Himalayas. The Indian government granted him asylum, alongside thousands of Tibetans escaping cultural and political repression. They were encouraged to establish settlements, like those in Dharamshala, where Tibetan Buddhism, language, and cultural traditions are actively preserved today. Even amid the chaos of World War II, this tradition held firm. When 1,000 Polish children were left orphaned and starving after their release from Soviet labor camps, the Maharaja of Nawanagar offered them his estate. Applying the ancient value of Atithi Devo Bhava, the guest is God, he provided them with housing, food, and schools until the war ended. These modern actions continue a pattern of behavior that has persisted for thousands of years. The ancient logic of Dharma and Vasudeva Kutumbakam eventually evolved into the legal framework of a modern nation. Today, these historical values of inclusion are explicitly written into the Indian Constitution. legally embedded as the principles of secularism, equality, and fundamental rights. It leaves us with a question to ask ourselves. How does this long history of sheltering the persecuted shape our own behavior in our neighborhoods, our schools, and our communities today? The historical evidence suggests that by inviting diverse peoples and their ideas into its social fabric, this civilization grew progressively more resilient and prosperous.